Now, let us have a look and celebrate the 40th legend of Australian sport.
Many will try, but there'll never be another Richie Benaud. He was unique, a man of great stature, admired by all ages.
And he's done it. He started off with the most beautiful delivery. Gary has absolutely no idea what has happened to it. He still doesn't know.
Writer Gideon Haigh described Richie as perhaps the most influential cricketer and cricket personality since the Second World War.
It was almost as though for the modern generation, we were born into Richie Benaud. We had limited idea about his provenance, but he was this kind of eternal sage and this feature of an endless summer.
And welcome to viewers in England, Pakistan, India, West Indies, New Zealand.
He was a player, captain, journalist, author, critic, commentator, organiser, advisor, and a doyen of the game.
Marvellous.
Richie either played in or commentated over 500 matches. A true all-rounder, he blended aggressive lower-order batting with leg spin, at which he was the finest of his era.
He's clean bowled.
Upon being appointed captain, Benaud led Australia to regain the Ashes in 1958-59. After they had been lost to England in the preceding 3 series. He then defended the Ashes twice. His greatest bowling performance came when he took 6 wickets for 70 runs, giving Australia victory against England and retaining the Ashes at Old Trafford in 1961. In 1962, he was named Wisden's Cricketer of the Year and was made a member of the Order of the British Empire. In 1963, he became the first player to achieve the Test match double of 200 wickets and 2,000 runs. He was a daring captain who led his country into 28 tests and never lost a series. After ending his reign as captain in 1964, Richie slid comfortably into the role of broadcaster.
A light roller would have about as much of an effect as a couple of koala bears doing the pas de deux.
Richie defined commentary and became the voice of cricket in both Australia and England. He captured the moment with class and style.
That's the first catch Rodney Marsh has made today.
From Test matches to the World Series era and beyond, he was held in the highest esteem. In 1985, Richie was inducted into the Sport Australia Hall of Fame as part of the inaugural group. In 2007, he was inducted into the Cricket Australia Hall of Fame, and he finally bowed out of commentary after more than 60 years' involvement in the game.
Meeting people and being mixed up in cricket has been one of my great joys. I've had a lot of assistance along the way from players, captains, and from everyone else who's had the pleasure of playing this game, this great game. And also from Daphne, a splendid lady who's much loved.
To successive generations of cricket followers, he was one of the most influential and certainly one of the most charming people in the history of cricket.
What a beauty. What a catch.
Richie Benaud OBE becomes the 40th member to be elevated to legend status in the Sport Australia Hall of Fame.
Ladies and gentlemen, Richie Benaud is now officially a legend of Australian sport. Would you please welcome to the stage his wife Daphne, brother John, and Richie's son Jeff. And to make the presentation, Dawn Fraser. Thank you, Dawn, and welcome, Bruce.
Sandy, thank you. They're comfy, aren't they? We'll have trouble getting out of these, Sandy, but I know it's a reasonable hours. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Richard
Yeah.
would have been very proud.
He would have. Daphne, is it rude of me if I start with John?
No?
Okay. John, Richard Benno. So he's 14 years older than you. So most Richards, if they were shortened in those days, would have been probably Dick or Dickie Benno. So what happened there? Why Richie?
Our grandfather was Richard, but he was known as Dick, and our mother decided that Richie wasn't going to be known as Dick under any circumstances. And so Rich and Richie came into being very early in the piece.
It sort of suits him, doesn't it? Because Dickie Benno wouldn't have felt quite the same. Do you think, Daphne?
No.
Suits umpires,
Rich and
but
Richie.
not Australian Test captains.
Now, John knew Richie before Daphne did, but you actually, Daphne, you saw Richie play Test cricket before John did, because 1953, Headingley,
Yes.
you
My
made
school
sure you got some good
holidays.
school. You made sure you got some good seats. Can you tell us about what impression the Aussie cricketers made on you, a young schoolgirl, I guess, in England, when you watched those Aussies play at Leeds?
Well, I thought they were much more exciting than the English team. They were all good looking, even though England had the likes of Compton and so on, but the Australians were more dashing.
Keith Miller and
Yes, Keith Miller was a favourite, Harvey was a favourite.
yeah.
So was
Daphne,
Richard,
get that
of
in
course.
just slightly closer. Is that all right?
Is that better?
That's perfect. So Daphne, so that was 1953, and you lined up with a girlfriend and got the best seats and
Well, we're sitting on the ground, on the grass by the boundary.
couldn't get closer.
No,
3 years later, so 3 years later in 1956, you're working for the BBC
Yes.
in Manchester, and you get to meet a couple of Australian cricketers, don't you?
yes, I met Arthur Morris and Jack Fingleton. They came to the studio, and that was exciting.
And then you start working for E.W. Swanton, who was a jack of all trades, one of the great cricket writers and media people of the time, 1961. Was that how you got to meet Richie?
It was because, Richie was captaining, and I used to go with Jim round all the matches. I had the perfect job because I loved cricket, and I just, for me to be at every test match, typing his letters, sitting in the press box, which was more, well, all the press boxes then were more like tomato sheds. They're now sort of proper media centres. But I was in heaven because I was watching cricket, but I was phoning the copy through and just doing what I really enjoyed doing most.
Jeff, so I think my arithmetic, I'm guessing you were born about the time that Richie became captain of Australia. It's about right, isn't it?
In 1958.
Yeah.
That's right.
So your mother and Richie split up when you were pretty young,
That's correct.
but your really big memories of Daff and also Richie together from Coogee when they went there in about 68. But what about World Series cricket? Did you get caught up in that excitement?
Well, I think the whole of Australia did really at the time. I mean, Coogee, their apartment there was a nerve centre really as World Series cricket came together. And I remember various people who became part of that, especially there was a TV producer, David Hill, from Channel 9, who was really a wonderful character. And innovation was his thing. Nothing was too bizarre to try out. And in fact, his catchphrase as they sat around the table was, "Dare to be different." So if anyone said, "Oh, you can't do that, it's not the way it's been done," he would say, "Dare to be different." And Dad and David Hill would sit at the dinner table over a few bottles of wine till 3 a.m. sometimes. And they would use the things on the table to represent how they were going to change the game of cricket, which at that time was black and white with one camera. So the salad bowl would be the pitch, and the salt shaker would be camera 2, and the pepper grinder would be camera 6, and they'd be ensconced in that, and occasionally Daphne would come out and say, I need to borrow camera 6. Right. But they were wonderful times, and they certainly changed the game.
And I know you saw Daphne and Richie as a team working so hard together in that little office of theirs, didn't you, for years?
They, at one stage, correct me if I'm wrong, Daff, but you had 5 people in one little converted bedroom, which was an office, as a nerve centre for World Series cricket. Some of the people here tonight were part of that, and it changed the game. And Dad loved innovation. He loved technology. He was not always a master of technology, but it's true. But he loved it.
Daphne, we're talking about World Series cricket, but I know in April 1977 you were entertaining. I wasn't stalking you, don't worry, but I know you're going to entertain one day, and Kerry Packer rang Richie and said, I need to see you. He went in and saw him. It was a big meeting. It was all about World Series cricket. He told Richie he couldn't tell anyone. Richie said, I've got to tell Daphne. And he said, OK, you can tell Daphne. He said, but I want your answer now. He said, you're not going to get my answer now because I've got to go back and talk to Daphne. So that's all true, I know.
That is true.
So Daphne, when he came home to tell you about World Series cricket, did he actually say to you, should I do it? What did he ask you?
Well, he didn't know very much, in fact, because Kerry had just said what was going to happen, that they were going to revolutionise cricket. So I was just told about it, and I said, fine. He said, we've got a meeting with Kerry in the morning. So I went and met Kerry and said, fine as well. And he said, what do you think the establishment, Lords and everywhere else, are going to think? I said, they won't like it. And that was the understatement of all time.
Well, the rest is history, Daphne. John, just back to cricket for a moment. I mean, Richie was not an overnight success. He started in 51, 52, and, you know, he had a modest beginning in many ways. Your father, Lou, you've mentioned your mum, Ren, a moment ago, but your father, Lou, was a great spin bowler in his own right. So what about that lesson he taught him on Sutherland Road not long after he'd come back from one of his first tours?
Well, from memory, it was his first tour, 53, and he hadn't had a great time in England. And what was I at the time? 8 years old. I remember standing on the front veranda and watching Dad and Rich go out into Sutherland Road and put the handkerchief down and a garbage tin as the stumps, and Rich wheeling away. And Dad always encouraged us to, in playing our cricket, to be a bit harsh when you're making self-judgments. And Richard made the self-judgment on this tour that his bowling wasn't up to scratch, and he'd consulted Bill O'Reilly, and Rich had to tell Dad that no longer was he going to just stick to Dad's advice. He was going to have to go and do what Bill O'Reilly had told him.
How did Lou take that?
Oh, well, as far as I know, I was only 8 years old.
Because the difference was that your father wanted Richie to bowl a different ball every ball almost, and O'Reilly told him he needed to get a pressure ball, didn't he?
That's correct. Yeah, Dad was a fairly adventurous spin bowler. He'd, as you say, like to try a different ball, every ball in an over, and couldn't really maintain as much pressure as you needed to do when you got into the first class game. Although Dad was a very good spin bowler, he hadn't played first class cricket.
I could talk to you for hours. We're not going to have hours. Daphne, Richie the man, I read in your notes that he couldn't swim and he couldn't dance. Is that right?
True.
You said it didn't bother you, though.
No.
But he was pretty good at cricket, golf, horse racing, loved the arts.
Yeah.
He did a bit of cooking.
Yes, he did. Yes, as an amateur only. But he tried.
He did lessons in Italy, didn't he?
He did a course with a great friend of ours, and there were 23 professionals, real proper cooks, and these 2 amateurs. But they had a really good time. But the other amateur, in fact, became quite a good cook. And so the pasta machine that Rich was using to make the homemade pasta. It got passed on to John, and he's still using it today.
Good. Well, Richie, that's obviously in better hands of Richie. But what about Richie, the commentator? Did he ever come home to you and say, Daff, I've had a bad day? Because none of us ever thought he had one.
Well, no, he never said that either. I mean, I would have been watching, and I might have said, not the best, but...
I'm glad he's not here. Just almost finally, but he had a couple of mannerisms that he raised his left eyebrow occasionally, and the bottom lip could protrude, couldn't it? Have any of you three been subject to those mannerisms?
Oh, yes. I can't
Yes,
remember.
I'd
I can't remember what I did, but certainly the eyebrow.
Well, I have had a few light bulb moments over the years that he raised the eyebrow and stuck the lip out too.
Ask some of his fellow commentators, because Mark Taylor, I think, for one, would tell a story or two in the commentary box.
Tubby, later tonight I'll have a beer with you and find out. But the lip would come back when things were going well?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Jeff, was he hard act to follow? Benno's...
Well, one of the good things about Dad was, as a father, he was just like he was in the rest of his life. He was very fair and benign and very balanced, and he had a great sense of humour. But he also was very philosophical. He used to say, you've got to take the rough with the smooth. And he had a saying, it's all part of the rich tapestry of life. And he would say that sometimes through very gritted teeth, but he would say it. And he would pass that on to me. But the best thing he did for me was to say, you've got to be your own person. You've got to go your own way and live your own life in your own way. And that's something I've always appreciated.
No, absolutely. What a wonderful man. And what about for John, ladies and gentlemen? I mean, John went to the Sydney Cricket Ground in 1956 with his father and saw Richie for the first time in a test, and Frank Tyson, the Typhoon, was bowling to him in 1956. And then when John made 142 at the Adelaide Oval, Richie was in the press box on the typewriter. Isn't that just a beautiful segue? The two boys, 14 years apart, a wonderful family. Your father and mother must have been so proud.
Yeah,
incredible.
Very proud.
Let me just finish by saying Jeff has had an incredibly successful career. In fact, they wrote the Mad Men series after him, being an advertising agent in America and all these places. John was an absolutely brilliant editor of The Sun and turned that newspaper around in New South Wales, and a wonderful cricketer. Daphne is so capable. If I ever get down to write a book, I'm coming to see you, Daphne. But Daphne could handle any situation, a great editor, an absolutely brilliant researcher, and obviously a wonderful companion. And just finally, I mean, 2,200 is bandied about a bit. Richie was the first to do it. But just think for a minute, there's only been 19 people, and I know, if my memory's good, I'm Sandy, I could be in trouble because I'm nearly as old as you, but...
He is.
So Richie does it, 2,200, and then Gary Sobers is the next, and then Ian Botham is the next, and then Imran Khan is the next, Kapil Dev, Sir Richard Hadley, Wasim Akram, Shane Warne. They were the first 8. They're good names. They're the best names imaginable. And Richie was the first. And to completely close it, Daphne, John, and to Jeff, I think Richie was asked to give his best 11 at some stage, and he picked it for players that changed the game and players we would remember when they were gone. And that's what we've done tonight with Richie Benaud. Congratulations.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you to the Benaud family.